There's a certain kind of person who has already lived 1,000 lives. Inside their mind, they've given the speech. They've written the book. They've launched the company, moved to the city they've imagined for years, had the conversation that changes everything, built the life they can describe in perfect detail. It plays like a film behind their eyes, vivid, warm, complete. And then the day ends. The evening comes in quietly, and nothing was started. Not because they're lazy, that word is too blunt, too simple, and it misses the point entirely. Something else is happening here, something that looks like stillness from the outside, but feels like a low, constant pressure from within. A life that keeps getting postponed. Not because it doesn't matter, but because somewhere deep and quiet, it matters more than almost anything else in the world. The dream is too precious to be risked. And so it stays, polished, intact, perfectly preserved, growing more beautiful and more distant with every year that passes. If you recognize that feeling, that peculiar mixture of longing and paralysis, then keep watching. Because what's happening to you is not what most people think it is. You are not lazy. Please hear that. You are not someone who lacks ambition, or someone who was simply built without the follow-through that other people seem to possess so effortlessly. You are not broken in the way that word implies, that flat, dismissive label that shuts down curiosity and allows everyone, including yourself, to stop asking the harder question. The harder question is this: why does someone who wants something this deeply do so little to reach it? The answer isn't comfortable, but it is compassionate in a way most people never expect. Because what holds the big dreamer still isn't a character defect. It is a form of protection. A deep, intelligent, entirely understandable act of self-preservation that the mind learned to perform, usually a long time ago, in circumstances that required it. You are not someone who doesn't believe in your dream. You are someone who believes in it so completely, who has wrapped so much of your identity around the vision of who you could become, that putting it to the test of real life feels like risking everything you have. And when something feels that risky, the mind finds a way to wait, indefinitely, elegantly, invisibly. Psychologists have a term for part of what's happening here. They call it identity-based self-handicapping. The tendency to avoid putting your most important self-concept to a direct, real-world test. Not because you don't want the result, but because if the test goes wrong, you don't just lose the attempt. You lose the story you have been quietly telling yourself about who you are. But there is a second mechanism operating beneath that one. And this is the part that almost no one talks about. Research in motivational psychology describes something called mental simulation, the brain's extraordinary capacity to generate the emotional experience of achieving a goal simply through the act of imagining it in rich, detailed terms. When you picture the finished project, the launched company, the life you have designed in your mind, your brain releases neurochemicals associated with reward and progress. Not the full dose, but enough. Enough to feel like something happened. Enough to quiet the urgency. Enough to make the dreaming feel productive, even when nothing in the physical world has moved. This is not a personal failing. This is how the brain works. In its remarkable efficiency, it found a way to give you the sensation of the destination without requiring the discomfort of the journey. And for someone who is afraid of what the journey might reveal, that is a bargain that is extraordinarily difficult to resist. Think about a child. Let's call him Elias. Elias was not the loudest child in any room he entered. He was the one at the edge of the noise, watching, imagining, building entire worlds quietly inside his mind while the louder children claimed the available space. He had ideas that felt enormous to him, too large for his small life. And sometimes, when he felt safe enough, he shared them. He told his father about the invention he was going to build. His father smiled briefly and changed the subject. He told his teacher about the story he wanted to write. She said, "That's very ambitious," in the tone that adults use when they mean something else entirely. He told the older boy on his street about the business he had imagined. And the boy laughed, not cruelly, but thoughtlessly, the way children do when something sounds too large. None of these moments were catastrophic. None of them were intended to wound. But Elias learned something in their accumulation that no one taught him directly. The dream held privately was safe, that as long as it existed only inside him, no one could evaluate it. No one could find it lacking. No one could look at him with that expression, the one that asks, without words, "Who do you think you are?" So he kept his dreams, but he kept them carefully. He nurtured them in his imagination and protected them from the exposure of the world. He spoke about them only in the future tense, someday, one day, when I'm ready, because the future tense is the only tense that cannot yet be proven wrong. The child who learned to protect his dreams that way grew into an adult who is still protecting them. Not out of laziness, out of loyalty. Loyalty to the version of himself that the dream makes possible. The version that is remarkable, capable, extraordinary, as long as it has never been tested. And here is where the psychology deepens, because Elias is not unusual, he is the pattern. Now here is the question I want you to hold on to for a moment, because the answer is going to reframe something important about yourself. If the inaction is protection, if all of this waiting and dreaming and preparing and postponing is actually a form of intelligent self-defense, then what exactly is it defending? What is so fragile at the center of someone with enormous dreams that it requires this level of guarding? Hold that thought, because the answer is not what most people expect. And we are almost there. Most people assume that big dreamers who never act are afraid of hard work, or afraid of failure, or simply undisciplined in ways they haven't found the motivation to fix. Those things may exist on the surface, but they are not the deepest layer. At the deepest layer, what the inaction is protecting is something almost unbearably tender. It is the dream itself. Here is the central paradox at the heart of this psychology. The dream, as long as it exists only in the imagination, is perfect. It contains every version of success you have ever envisioned. The book that lives only in your mind is not a flawed book. It is the best possible book, untouched by the compromises that execution always demands. The business you haven't started has not yet made its first mistake. The project, the relationship, the reinvented life. In imagination, they remain whole, intact, full of every possibility at once. To act is to choose one reality, and to choose one reality is to let all the others go. Psychologists describe this as the pain of foreclosure, the emotional cost of stepping fully into one version of your life and closing the door on every beautiful alternative. For someone whose identity has become quietly fused with the grandness of their dream, that cost can feel unbearable. Because the dream is not merely a goal, It is a mirror. It is the version of yourself you find most worth being. And so the mind constructs a compromise. It builds an endless bridge between the dreaming and the doing, calls it preparation, and spends years crossing it without ever arriving. Tomorrow, after I learn a little more, when I have more money, more time, more confidence, a clearer sign that this is the right moment. This is not procrastination in the ordinary sense. It is grief postponement. The dreamer is delaying, with remarkable ingenuity, the moment they might have to stand in the gap between who they imagined they would be and who they actually are right now. And in that gap lives the real fear. Not the fear of failure, the fear of finding out. So here is the answer to the question I asked earlier. What is the dreaming protecting? It is protecting the self-concept, the inner narrative, the version of you that is quietly capable of remarkable things, as long as that capability has never been tested against reality. Because untested potential is still potential. It contains everything. Not started means not failed, and not failed means the dream, and the identity built around it, survives. What the dreaming is protecting at its deepest root is the last fully safe place where you are allowed to be who you have always believed you could be. That is not weakness. That is the psychology of someone who was taught, in ways both spoken and invisible, that their worth is conditional. That failure would say something permanent about who they are. That the gap between the dream and the reality would prove something they cannot bear to have proven. It makes complete, heartbreaking sense. Of course you protected it. Of course you waited. You were doing the only thing that felt safe. None of what I have described is a character flaw. The capacity to dream with this kind of vividness, to hold a detailed, emotionally alive vision of a different life and feel it almost as though it already existed, is not a problem. It is a form of intelligence, a deeply human one. The imagination was doing exactly what it is built to do. It was keeping the possibility of something better alive in conditions where acting on it felt too dangerous. The issue was never that you dreamed too much. The issue is that somewhere, at some point in your history, the dream stopped being a direction and became a residence, a beautiful, private, immaculately maintained place to live, rather than somewhere to leave from. And that didn't happen because you're weak. It happened because wanting the dream this much, truly, privately, with your whole chest, made you afraid in a way that almost nothing else could. The person who keeps a dream untouched for years is not someone who doesn't care enough to try. They are someone who cares so deeply and has made so much of their inner identity out of who the dream says they could be, that trying and discovering the ordinary truth feels more threatening than never knowing. This isn't a failure of character. This is a wound dressed in ambition. And wounds, when they are finally seen clearly, not judged, not shamed, just seen, begin slowly to lose some of their power. What changes this is not discipline. It is not a better system, a sharper routine, or the discovery of some motivational trick you haven't tried yet. Those tools are not wrong, but they address the surface while the root stays untouched. What changes this is something smaller, something quieter. It is the willingness, slowly, without forcing anything, to let the dream be imperfect in the real world, not to lower your standards, not to abandon the vision, but to understand in the way that only real understanding can reach you. that the imperfect, uncertain, slightly clumsy version of you who begins something today is more real and more worthy of your own respect than the perfect version who is always on the verge of beginning. Neuroscience is clear on this point. The brain builds new identity pathways through action, not through intention. Every small, unglamorous beginning, however unpolished, however incomplete, creates a piece of actual evidence about who you are. Evidence that imagination, no matter how vivid or sustaining, is never able to provide. The dreamer who writes 3 uncertain sentences has more real information about themselves than the dreamer who writes nothing and imagines everything. The person who makes the imperfect first call, sends the awkward email, begins the project on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon with no ceremony and no certainty, they have crossed into a different relationship with their own potential. Not a perfect relationship, not a resolved one, but a real one. This doesn't happen overnight. It won't feel like a breakthrough. There will be false starts and weeks that look like the old pattern returning. That is not failure. That is the actual texture of becoming someone new. It is slow, non-linear, and sometimes barely perceptible from the inside, which is exactly why it requires patience rather than force. It begins not with a declaration, but with an admission. A quiet, honest one. I have been afraid, and I am going to begin anyway. Not because I am ready, not because the conditions are finally right, but because I understand at last that waiting to be ready was always the dream's most elegant way of keeping me still. The dream was never the problem. The dream was proof. Proof that somewhere inside you, in a place that years of waiting and protecting and quietly postponing could never fully reach, something still believed. Not in a flawless version of your life, but in the possibility of a real one. You were never lazy. You were never indifferent. You were afraid, in the most understandable way a person can be afraid, of the distance between who you imagined yourself to be and who you actually are right now. But here is what I want you to carry from this. That distance is not evidence of failure. That distance is the invitation. Every person who has ever made something real began in exactly that gap, uncertain, unready, deeply aware of the space between their vision and the present moment. The gap is not the obstacle, the gap is the work. And the work, however imperfect, is the only thing that has ever turned a dream into a life. The world already has enough perfect, untouched, unbegun dreams. What it needs, what you need, is the courage to begin the imperfect one, slowly, gently, without waiting to be ready, because the dream was never meant to stay a dream. It was always just the beginning of the conversation between who you are right now and who you still have time to become.